Okay, cool. So welcome everybody. So my name is Pete Metz and I am a loan officer here in Reading. I've been in the Reading community now since 1999. I got started in the mortgage industry back in 2003 and have been doing mortgages ever since. And I'm coming up on my 20 years and I know it kind of dates me a little bit, starting to get a little bit of gray here. But so on the call, we're going to be going over the current state of the real estate market. We're going to talk about interest rates. When will they come down? And then we have a really awesome guest here on the call. His name is Bob Sprinkle. And Bob is going to be here with us, and he's going to share his thoughts on the real estate market. He's appraised about a little over 10,000 homes roughly in his career, and he can talk about that. And he has a really, really good pulse on the market. And he's going to be giving his thoughts. And during the call, while I go through these slides, if you guys have questions, like if you have a question for Bob or myself, I want you to put those questions in the comment section on the Zoom call. And so we're going to be monitoring that and looking at all the questions that come in, and then we're going to answer all the questions at the end when we get to the end. So call shouldn't last more than 30, 40 minutes, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So Bob's been in the community since March of '99. He was an appraiser before and during the 2008 housing crisis. We're going to talk about, are we in the same crisis today? He is regarded as one of the most knowledgeable and experienced appraisers in our county within the real estate and mortgage community. Bob has appraised tens of thousands of homes in Shasta County and has direct pulse on the market. So the first thing I want to do is just talk about the current state of the Shasta County real estate market. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is I'm going to basically give an idea, because what was going on pre-pandemic. So we're going to look at 2019 third quarter, and then we're going to look at the third quarter that we just completed in 2022. So we're going to compare basically what's happened, what was going on in 2019 third quarter of that year, and then third quarter of this year, because we just finished. So the average days on the market, if you list a home back in 2019, that home on average would sit for 90 days before it got sold. In the third quarter of this year, 2022, it was about 79 days it sat on the market on average. And then number of homes sold for that quarter in 2019 was 877. So a little bit more homes than this year. We did have more inventory back in 2019 than what we do today. The average list price was $316,000 back in 2019, and get this, 2022, it's almost $100,000 more average list price in 2020. Average list price in 2022, third quarter 2022. Average sales price was $309 back in 2019. Average sales price today is $407. And so that's a solid 30% appreciation in just a couple of years. Now, this number is interesting, percent of list price. What this number means right here is that what homes sold, they sold for 97% of what the home was listed for. So if a home was listed for $100,000, the average, when it sold for $97,000, basically 97% of what the home was listed for. And of course, in 2019, the average interest rate in 2019 was 3.75, and here we are in 2022, the average interest rate 6%, nearly double what we had back in 2019. Okay, and then we go to are we in a buyer's market or are we in a seller's market? I get this question a lot as I work with a lot of buyers, and how we come up with this number, a buyer's market or seller's market. Historically, a buyer's market equals 6 months or more of inventory. It equals a buyer's market. What that means is if the home is listed for 6 months and it takes 6 months to sell that house, then, and on average, then that would be a buyer's market. So right now we have 723 listings right now in Shasta County on the market. And last month in September, there was 231 closings in the Shasta County market. So if you take this number and divide this, that basically means that it would take 3 months to get rid of this inventory here before we wouldn't have any more homes to sell. And so months of inventory is 3.1. And so historically, a seller's market is if we have less than 3 months of inventory. And so you can see here, we're right at about 3 months of inventory. So the other thing that's very interesting is the first quarter of 2022, the average sales price was $411,000. The third quarter, this last quarter, the average sales price has come down to $384,000. And so that basically means that the average sales price is down by about 6.5%. Some more people are coming in here to the call. Just going to let them into the room. Okay, so that basically means that we have basically 6% decline in the average sales price since the beginning of this year. So one of the things here, I wanted Bob to kind of comment on this before I go to the next slide. And
yeah,
so
it's interesting, Pete. You're showing all of Shasta County there, correct?
Yes.
And you're showing about a 6.5% decline from the first quarter. I run stats on just Reading, and the drop is less when you just include Reading. So that would mean the outlying areas are dropping much faster than Reading. I have a report here I'm looking at. The first quarter of just Reading sales, it was 420,000. And it actually jumped up to 445,000 in the second quarter, and then it backed up just slightly to 439,000 in the third quarter.
Wow.
So
it's a little higher.
Yeah, higher amounts and less depreciation. So you're 445 to 439. I mean, you're only talking 1.5% decline from last quarter in Reading.
Gotcha. So what you're saying is this is Shasta County in Reading. The average sales price only declined about 1% since January.
About 1.5% since the second quarter.
Second quarter, okay. Got it.
Yeah, so, which now looking at your stats, I guess outside of the Reading area in Shasta County has dropped probably more than the 6.5% since Reading's only dropped 1.5%.
Yeah. Yeah, that would make sense. That would make sense. Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. So the next one I want to talk about is obviously, this is basically our current situation where we're at in the Shasta County real estate world is interest rates. And so interest rates in the last, 6 months have gone from 3%. And now we're, right around 6.5%, 6.75% on a 30-year fixed mortgage on average. And so that's basically a double. And so what I wanted to show you guys is, this has happened before in history. And so if we go back in history, we can kind of get an idea. Now, it's obviously a very different market today, very different world that we all live in. But we can kind of get an idea of what happened. And are we in the same situation historically? So back in 1980, 1982, interest rates, I kind of circled it here. Interest rates, this is the 30-year fixed mortgage dating all the way back to 1970s. And the 30-year fixed mortgage went from 10% all the way up to 18% in a very, very short amount of time. And, this is basically an almost double. And the big question that people ask, what did home values do during the 1980, 82, 83? Did they go up or did they go down? And so I do have that graph here. So what you're looking at here is the Case-Shiller U.S. National House Price Index. So what this shows is the home appreciation in the US dating back to the 1960s. So you can see here back in the 80s when interest rates went from 10 to 18%, the housing stayed very strong. We didn't actually see a crash in the real estate market. And, I'm not saying it's the same today, but we're just looking historically. A lot of my customers are like, it feels like 2008, feels like 2007. These home prices are inflated. And this right here is obviously the big recession and the housing crash. And you can see that housing prices, tanked in 2008, 2009. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to show you this is because in order for us to have a crash, it comes down to a supply and a demand. How much demand do we have for our housing right now? And how much supply do we have right now in our market? So historically, this is nationwide. And so nationwide, this shows you how many homes were on the market all the way back to 1983. So in 2007, we had about 3.7 million homes on the market. And today we have, only 1.2 million homes on the market nationwide, roughly. And you'll notice here that this is like the peak, we had so much inventory here. And this is another interesting graph because this shows you the last 4 or 5 years of our inventory nationwide. And you'll see that every single year during the spring, listings go up. We have more inventory to sell every single year. And of course, Bob, you can comment on this too, in our market, the inventory typically climbs in around, February, March, April in the spring so that they can, move their kids during the summer.
Yeah, most people aren't interested in listing their houses around the holidays. So you see most of the listings as well as most of the purchases and most of the appreciation runs generally from March through about June, July time. Gotcha.
Okay. So you can see here, so we started the year in January, February. Bob, what was the supply in Shasta County? How many homes do we have in the market?
I think we got down to 324 was the low.
Okay, in this year, it's 324. So now we're sitting, back on this previous side, we have about 723 homes on the market.
And that's where it's been about the last 2 months. It climbed really quickly right around May. And then really since June, it's kind of just stayed at that number between 700 and 745 range.
Gotcha. Okay. So this is typical, in a normal market for inventory to climb throughout the year. Now that we kind of look at the supply, what's bringing in the demand for these homes? And I wanted to share this because, the millennial generation, they're all turning 33, 34, 35. They were all born right here in the beginning of the 80s. I'm kind of on the edge, Bob. I'm between Gen X and a millennial. And so I'm like right in here, I was born right in 1980, but the millennials, they're all they're 32, 33, 34. And so these are all first-time buyers. And they're creating more households. And so this graph here will show you how many households do we have back in 2007? Well, we had about 116 million households in the US. Well, now 2021, this generation that we have, the Gen Xers, it's the biggest generation since the baby boomers. This is the baby boomer generation right here.
My generation.
What's that?
My generation.
Yeah, that's your generation. So the millennials, they're creating a lot more households. Well, what's a household? It's basically when someone moves out of the parents' house, or you have families living together and now someone's moving out and they need a house. They're going to go rent an apartment. They need to create another household. And so that's basically what this is showing you is now we have 129 million households in the US versus 116 back in 2007. And so We have 14 million more households, but we have 3 million fewer homes on the market. And so where are rates today? Rates about 6.7% on average. You can see here, big question is, when is this going to end? Like, what's the end? Are rates going to hit 10? Are they going to hit 11, 12%? And obviously I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm going to just show you some data that kind of leads me to believe that I think inflation could tame beginning of this next year, and I'm going to show you why. This is the historical graph of the 30-year fix, similar to the one I showed before, and you can kind of see this sharp increase. So how does interest rates go up? So before we know, in order for us to know when rates are going to come down, we kind of have to know why rates go up. And so what you're looking at here is rates go up they follow very closely to inflation, okay? And so it's hard to see on this graph, but there's a pink line, which this pink line is this lower line here. And then the 30-year fix is this above line right here, okay? And so this above line is your 30-year fix. And so you can see inflation. This is going back to 2018. And the inflation reports come out every single month on what the previous inflation report, it's called the CPI report. And the government follows this very closely. This is what they look at when they want to raise or lower the federal funds rate, which this 30-year fixed rate is not the federal funds rate. It's a long-term rate, and the federal funds rate is a short-term rate. So we're looking at the 30-year fixed. So it's following your inflation, and you can see as inflation rises, you can see the increase in rates, inflation comes down, rates come down, and then you can kind of see, there's kind of a disconnect. You're like, what is this? Why is this kind of disconnected here? Well, because of the pandemic, right here is when the government started artificially coming in and buying our mortgage debt. And so the 30-year fixed mortgage, it goes up and down based on who buys our mortgage debt. Well, who buys our mortgage debt? Well, other countries buy our mortgage debt, hedge funds, retirement funds, they all buy our mortgage debt. And when you invest your money, let's say you invest your money, you have $100,000, you want to invest for 30 years, you want to buy a mortgage, and you're going to get a fixed rate of return, right, on that money. And let's say all the prices around you, and on that $100,000, you're getting $1,000 a month, let's say. All the prices around you are increasing in price. And so, but you're still stuck at that $1,000 a month. And so in order for you to, somehow get better, you got to raise that yield or raise that interest rate for that longer term investment. And so this is why interest rates go up when inflation goes up. And so what this disconnect is the government was artificially buying our mortgage debt, keeping rates low. So they were buying our mortgages. Well, what happened right here, January of this year, they came out and announced, and this is directly when rates started increasing. They said, hey, we're going to stop buying our mortgage debt. And in fact, because they were buying our mortgage debt here, they want to sell what they bought. So they had bought trillions of dollars of mortgages from 2020 to 2022. And they did this before. They did it in 2008. They did it during the recession, big recession. They did it in 2015, 2016, and then they stopped. And then they did it again in 2020 to stimulate the economy. And then they stopped. And then they said, hey, we're going to sell. So they're putting more mortgage supply out, which creates more supply. And there's obviously less demand. So that's where you see interest rates then going back in with inflation. And so when we look at this, okay, so the real question is it's not when will rates come down. The real question is, when will inflation come down, right? Because that's when we know rates will come down. And so this here is what the feds look at for inflation. And follow me here because it could get a little confusing, but I'm going to do my best to explain this. So what you're looking at here is the core consumer price index. So it's an index that basically keeps track of all the prices of our goods and services. And what the core means that they take out food and energy. So this is without food and energy, and they're just looking at, basically our goods and services that are being sold. And they track this and they say, okay, every month we're going to say, okay, how much did these goods and services increase by? So you can see every single month, like, for example, back in September of last year, the goods and services increased by 0.3% for the month. Okay. Well, if you take 0.3% times 12, that's what you're looking at. That's what makes up 12 months of these numbers, what makes up the core consumer price index. It's the year-over-year consumer price index. So the 6.3. And so when we have a new month that comes out, so we're going to get September's reading. And when we get September's reading, this number here will fall off the report, and then we're just going to go from October to September of 2022. And so you can see here that we got to get past this September reading because this was pretty low for inflation. And the feds, they want our inflation number to be at 2% a year. Their target is 2% for inflation. Well, right now we're at 6.3%. Okay. And so 2% appreciation would be like 1.6 per month right here, would all equal that 2%. And so you can see here 0.6 plus 0.5 plus 0.6, this all is equaling 6.3. So when we get our September's reading, our August reading was 0.6%. Well, if we get anything similar to 0.6, it's replacing our 0.3. So what's going to happen with our inflation number? Well, this core CPI is going to go up. That's not going to be good for our mortgage rates. And so my estimation is that it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. Because once we get October's reading, November, December, January, we could see, 0.2%, 0.3%, October, November, December reading, because they have been fighting inflation. They are fighting this very hard by raising the federal funds rate. And so if we get, 0.2, 0.3, October, November, December, you're going to start to see this decline right here. And, the real time is obviously to get past these higher numbers. So my belief is once we get past November, December, January, and these fall off, I think beginning of this next year, you'll see rates start coming back down. And then by the end of 2023, we're going to get past this May, June higher numbers, and we're going to see, interest rates hopefully decline. And so I hope that made sense. I know that was a lot of information, but, it's basically, allowing us to see, why these interest rates go up and how they can come back down. And so that was a lot of information regarding the market. So I'm going to ask Bob a couple questions, and that's why you guys are all here. You guys want to hear from Bob. And so the first question I have for you, Bob, is, does this market feel like 2007, 2008 when you're out appraising these homes?
No, not. There's certain aspects of it that you wonder, but it really is different, because back then values had got pretty crazy like they are now. However, it was artificial based on loan products that got people into houses that didn't really qualify, and all those loan requirements were tightened up. You don't have that as much anymore.
Yeah.
You had and then people were in negative AM loans. And so when the market turned down a little bit, things started to escalate because people started losing houses because they couldn't afford them. Well, now everybody's in 3% mortgages. And so you won't have that kind of fallout.
Yeah. So you figure, okay, if in order for the market to crash, you got to have a lot of sellers, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
and
a lot of sellers.
A lot of people losing jobs.
Losing jobs, selling their home. And these are people that would need to not buy a home, because if they're buying, they're not creating more supply. Right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So they're selling their home. So yeah, that's a good point, Bob, because if they're at a 3% interest rate, why would they want to sell to go to a 6 or 7% interest rate at a higher price?
Yeah, because you can't really because if you try to downsize, you're not really downsizing your mortgage payment because now you're paying double. And if you want to move up, well, then you probably can't afford it because the rate's twice what you were paying on a smaller house.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it really handcuffs people in the house they're in.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. And by the way, if any of you have questions for Bob, I'm going to ask a few more questions for him or myself. Definitely put it in the chat, and we'll definitely get to you here as well. Okay, so Bob, thanks for that. My second question is, are you noticing more seller concessions to buyers? Some people might not. But I'm going to explain that question. So what a seller concession is if a buyer wants to buy a house, they can buy it and pay the normal price, or they can buy it and ask the seller to basically give them a credit to pay for their closing costs. So it helps the buyer out with their closing costs. This typically happens, when we're transitioning into, a buyer's market, or a seller's market into a buyer's market. But yeah, are you seeing more seller concessions, sellers giving credits to buyers?
Absolutely. And the ones we're seeing are much higher than we've seen in the past. I think part of it, closing costs, and some of it may be buying down interest rates a little bit, but they're definitely higher than they've been and more often.
Yeah, and I can touch on that too, Bob. It's true. They're getting more credit so that they can buy down that interest rate and get a little bit lower payment, than what is there to make it more affordable.
Sure.
Yeah. Cool. And then let's see here. Do you see a current market trend to justify negative adjustments for time on appraisals? So do you want me to explain that question?
Yeah, I understand it. If you want to explain it to everybody else.
Yeah, so basically what this means is when Bob goes out and appraises a home, and what he has to do is he has to look at recent sales. And so let's say he found a home that was similar to the house that he's appraising, and that home sold 3 months ago. Well, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, the home prices were a little bit higher. And so it's been 3 or 4 months since the home that he's appraising selling. And so on one of his adjustments for value, he can adjust for time, meaning he can say the market's kind of correcting a little bit. And so we're going to adjust the value down on this appraisal. The opposite can happen too. I'm sure Bob can say this as well. In the last 2 years, you can adjust if time has passed and home prices are appreciating, he can actually increase the value of the adjustment.
Absolutely. And for the last year and a half, I've been making 1% time adjustments per month going up. I was making those until May. And so if you had a $400,000 house and you're looking at a sale of an identical house 3 months ago, you would do a 3% time adjustment, which would be $12,000 to that other house to get to where you are then.
Yeah.
Now the market kind of reset a little bit. And so at this point, I'm trying to use the most current comps I have available. So they're only, some of them I'm finding, within a weeks and a month or two, where they're almost too soon to need the time adjustments as of today. Things are changing rapidly. Like I said, Reading hasn't really dropped that much over the last 3 months to merit them yet. However, I'm seeing some contracts coming in going forward that might start happening. Sure. I just did one in Shasta Lake City today that's going to need them. They seem to be dropping a lot faster than Reading.
Gotcha. Shasta Lake.
Right.
Yeah. Here's a question for you. Do you oh, what was my question? I just lost it. What's that?
Thought you were a millennial, not a baby boomer.
I know. Let's see, what was it here? Oh, are you seeing any appraisal, or when you get an appraisal order, are you seeing where homes are still trying to sell for more than what you're valuing, what the value is? Like Like, do you have any appraisals, coming in where they're less than what the purchase price is?
No, people are negotiating really good deals right now. I mean, obviously back in May, people were wanting to pay more than the appraised value to get into those low interest rates before things changed. Now people are negotiating really good deals.
Nice. That's good to know. Good to know. Here's a question in the chat from Kathleen. How does an appraiser determine just how much to adjust upward or downward with these very recent changes in home valuations?
Again, it's totally based on what the comps tell you. We don't decide on our own. We just look at the comps and say, does it make sense? You also have to look at the active listings. If your house is selling for $300,000 and there's comps a few months ago that sold for $320,000, but the listings are showing $300,000, well, then that's what it is.
Yeah.
So every neighborhood's different. Every appraisal's different. When there's quick changes, that's when it's tough to figure out exactly what the number is.
Yeah. I have another question for you. So let's say someone's thinking about selling their home and, they want to obviously get top dollar. When you make your adjustments, there's a couple line items that's for quality of quality of construction. I think there's another one for something
for condition. Yeah.
Condition. Yeah. So any tips you can give to any sellers on the call that might be thinking about selling?
Pete, the appraisals we've been working on this week, we noticed that the super clean houses are still pushing the top of the market. People want the really clean houses. The ones that you have work to do, they're the ones really getting beat up.
Got it. Good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know. Awesome. Any other questions? Definitely put them in the chat. Bob, do you think that you could appraise my home for like $1.5 million?
Just roll the dice. Let's do it.
That was a question I had. That would be really nice, actually.
Yeah, there isn't a lot of $1 million sales happening. Although there is one out in Palisadro pending for the $1.5 million range. Should be closing.
Really?
Here. Yeah, should be closing here pretty quick. Losing you a little bit, Pete.
Oh, what's the square footage on that one?
4,800.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That pretty much wraps up the call. I hope everyone, learned something and got some good information out of it. If you guys have more questions, feel free to reach out to Bob. I'll send you guys all, information. You guys can get a hold of me if you guys have other questions too. And definitely really appreciate all you guys showing up for the call. And I'm really thankful, and thanks Bob for showing up. I really appreciate
having me, Pete.
Definitely appreciate all your hard work that you do for us.
You betcha. Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Yeah.